Welcome. Julia Trencher from MIRA, Jill Hwang as well, and so we will get started. So Julia, I'll hand it off to you. All right.
I'm a law student at Northeastern, and MIRA trained me to give this presentation. So I'm not a lawyer, which means I don't give legal advice, I give legal information. As was said at the end of the presentation, we'll have a chance to ask questions. We may not know the answers, but we'll try our best. Unfortunately, right now, there are a lot of things that are unknown. And if you have a question at the end, it would be great if it was kind of phrased in a general way. You may know that lawyers have like an allergy to giving individual, like personal information because that counts as advice. So if you can phrase it in a general way, that will make us more able to answer your question. Okay, with that we can get started. Perfect. Yeah, you heard a little bit about MIRA. They're a Boston area immigration nonprofit. And they do a lot of direct services for immigrants in Massachusetts. We can go to the next one, yeah, and the next one again. Perfect. So how many of you have heard of the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS? Okay, a fair number, cool. Immigration is really confusing. I personally think it's on purpose, but the Department of Homeland Security actually has 3 parts to it. So we have Immigration and Customs Enforcement, which is ICE, Customs and Border Protection, which also is known as CBP, and U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, also known as USCIS, a lot of acronyms. And so all of these fall under the Department of Homeland Security. The president is like kind of in charge of the Department of Homeland Security. And they serve different functions. So ICE is supposed to, their main purpose is to enforce immigration law within the interior of the US. So that's why we see them detaining people and yeah, doing that kind of enforcement activity. CBP, as we may think or assume, is at the border. So if you've ever crossed a land border, you would see them there. They're also at airports. And yeah, they have like broad enforcement range within 100 miles of the border. So if you've ever been up in like Vermont or something, or Maine, and been near the Canadian border, you might go through a CBP checkpoint because they're allowed to have checkpoints within 100 miles of the border. Finally, USCIS is not an enforcement mechanism, so their job is not to detain someone or like have a checkpoint and ask you questions. Their job is to adjudicate immigration applications. So if you've heard of someone like applying for a green card through marriage, USCIS is the entity that would receive that application and review it and do an interview. Okay, good. So there are many ways that people come into contact with immigration enforcement. Prior to this administration, I would say, and maybe Jill has an opinion, but I would say mostly people came into contact through some type of contact with the police. So first the person might be arrested, or they might just like have some type of contact with the police, and then through that criminal process, whether they were convicted or not, ICE would be alerted that they were undocumented or that they didn't have a certain status they were supposed to. Yes, go ahead.
Just gonna chime in here. This is really a presentation that Julia, it's a presentation that she's prepared, but I'm just gonna chime in a little bit. If we could go back to the previous slide, I just wanted to, there are different specialties within people who help with immigration, right? Immigration attorneys, paralegals, and ICE is one of them where they get detained, and there are immigration attorneys that are trained for detention work, right? This is where you do bail, right? You have to like do a bail hearing to see if you can get someone out of detention. USCIS is a separate kind of specialty, and this is where you file forms, right? So yes, you can, through the police, get in front of immigration through ICE. But you can also, by your own will, file a application, and then you end up with USCIS to process that application. And that also, there's attorneys that do that, right? They help you file forms, they go to interviews with you. There's a whole process around that. The other thing that maybe we'll touch later that's not on here is immigration court, and that's a whole separate entity, and attorneys would be trained to then go into court with you to fight your case and hopefully keep you out of detention. So there are a lot of different moving pieces in these three areas.
Yeah, that's a great point. I think how I like to think about it, to keep it clear, is that ICE and CBP are enforcement. They're kind of like the police of immigration, and USCIS and Immigration Court are like the people who decide what happens to your case, like your legal case. So they're more like the judges of immigration. Okay, continuing on. Sure, I guess you had a chance to read that, that's fine. There are many, many reasons someone can be deported. Obviously, if someone doesn't have any type of papers or any type of status and entered the country without detection, they don't have permission under immigration laws to be here, so that those people could be deported. To be clear, an immigration violation is not a criminal violation, it's a civil violation. Okay. Other reasons are criminal grounds can make someone, even with a green card, which is kind of like the most protected form of status besides being a citizen, deportable. It's extremely confusing which crimes make a green card holder deportable, but in general, it's usually like more violent crimes, but sometimes it can be very small crimes, like theft. So that's like an area where, speaking of immigration attorneys, if someone is a green card holder and had some type of contact with the police, they would really need a legal consult to figure out their status. Yeah, okay, I think the other ones make sense. I think just in terms of like reasons for deportation, right now the Trump administration is doing a lot of unprecedented things and deporting people that used to not be a priority. There used to be priorities for enforcement. So it used to be like, okay, ICE is gonna go out and detain people who have criminal records, or they're gonna go out and detain people who are closer to the border or something like that. And now it seems like it's quite all over the place. And also he's trying out new ways to deport people. So that's kind of confusing, but yes, we'll continue on. These are the normal ones, I guess. So as I said, like the green card holders, which is like a step below US citizens, can be deportable if they are convicted, arrested for a crime that would make them deportable. So anyone that's not a citizen is deportable technically. Yeah, okay, we can keep going. And then like, obviously, I think the other people other types of status, like undocumented people, visa holders are deportable as well, depending on their situation. Okay. For the expansion of expedited removal, I don't know. Has anyone heard of expedited removal before? No, it's kind of like a legal thing. Expedited removal is a pretty intense immigration enforcement policy. As it says, it allows, it prioritizes people who have been in the US under 2 years to be deported unless they pass an initial asylum screening without giving them an opportunity to see a judge. So usually, if someone's picked up by ICE and they're detained, they have a chance to see a judge in very general terms. But expedited removal, this policy means that people, unless they affirmatively say, like, I want an asylum interview, or I'm scared to return to my country, I want asylum, and they can't prove, or they're not affirmatively proving that they've been here for more than 2 years, they may just be deported without the chance to fight their case or see a judge. So the information here that's good to keep in mind about how to, if you were, yes, information that's good to keep in mind is that if someone is an immigrant or is not a citizen and has been here for over 2 years, it is helpful for that person to keep anything that demonstrates that they've been here over 2 years, maybe on their person even, walking around. For some people, for example, if someone's a green card holder, the green card might say like issued in and the year might be before 2 years ago. But maybe a visa holder might want to keep something with them in their wallet or something that demonstrates that they've been in the US for 2 years, so that if they are stopped by immigration enforcement, they can demonstrate that they are not subject to expedited removal, that they have a chance to see a judge and fight their case. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, and the immigration court generally moves very slowly. So that is the, when you hear about going in front of an immigration judge, it doesn't necessarily sound like a good thing. But because it runs slow, it gives you time, right? You have to then be put on the judge's docket. It takes time to get scheduled for a hearing. And at that point, you have time to see an immigration attorney and figure out if you have a case and how to move forward.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. Seeing an immigration judge means that someone, if they're not in detention, they have usually several years to fight their case while they remain here, usually. Okay, we can move on past expedited removal. If you have questions about that at the end, would love to hear. I know it's kind of confusing. Has anyone heard of the registration rule? No. Okay. This went into effect, I think, on April 11th. It's a new rule that says everyone who's not a citizen needs to be registered with the government. Many immigrants who are here who have had contact with the government, with especially the immigration branch of the government, already are considered registered. So that counts as green card holders, visa holders, people who entered under parole, excuse me. All of those people are already considered registered. People who are not considered registered are people who came into the US without detection and have never applied for anything, for any immigration benefit. Like for example, if someone came here without any papers and was not detected, and they have other form of contact with the government, like, I don't know, what's a good example? I'm trying to think of an example. I don't know, maybe they applied for SNAP or something. That wouldn't count as being registered because they're not registered with immigration. They have had contact with the government in a different way. They need to have had contact with immigration branch of the government. So if someone is not registered, they may face criminal charges for not having registered. This is a very new rule, and I don't think it has ever been in place before. And so everyone's trying to figure out really what it means. But if you think that you fall into that category of being someone who doesn't have status and has never spoken to or presented oneself to the immigration branch of the government, you would probably want to speak to an immigration attorney about that and registering. And I know a lot of this information can be stressful, and I'm sorry about that. Do you want to add anything? Okay, we can go to the next one. Okay, so now we're going to talk about what happens if you encounter immigration enforcement either in your home or on the street. What are your rights? Yep. So the U.S. Constitution applies to everyone. You don't have to be a citizen to have protections like under the Fourth Amendment, for example. Yes, non-citizens have constitutional protections as well. Mm-hmm. I'll stop asking if anyone's heard of these things, but maybe some of you have seen these red rights cards. They are usually bilingual, or they can be bilingual in many, many languages. And on one side it says, your rights as an immigrant, and on the other side it says, like, I am exerting my right to remain silent, I want to speak to an attorney, and so the idea is that someone can hand this card to an immigration enforcement officer, like an ICE person, to exert their rights. Especially for people who don't speak English, it might be very helpful because it's in English, on one side. Okay, and you can order those online if you want to give them out. Okay, so I think there's been, at least in my circle, there's been a lot of talk about what happens if immigration enforcement comes to your home. I think the biggest thing to know for me, at least, is that immigration needs a warrant to come into your home. And most of the time, they do not have a warrant because it's a pain to get a warrant. It needs to be signed by a judge. And so they either have nothing with them, or they have documents that may look like a judicial warrant, but they're not a judicial warrant. Maybe they have a warrant that's signed by their supervisor, or they have, I don't know, a document that says that they have permission to come, but they need something signed by a judge, like a non-immigration judge that says that they can come into your house. On the next slide, we'll see what a judicial warrant looks like, but that's I think the big thing is that normally they don't have this document that they need to have in order to come into your house. The second biggest thing is that they can come into your house if you give them permission to. That's always the case. So if someone opens their door and says, come in, or even opens their door and someone says, can I come in? And you say yes, then that's permission, even if that person is, the household member is scared or confused or doesn't know what's going on. If that person allows them access to their home, they've given permission. Okay. Yep, same rights as before about with the red cards. You have the right to remain silent and to speak to an attorney. And yeah, I think that's the idea is if immigration comes to your door, you're allowed to just keep the door closed unless you see a judicial warrant, and you can ask them to put it under the door and otherwise remain silent and say, I'm remaining silent, I want to speak to an attorney. Okay, next one. So this is an example of a judicial warrant. I guess it's not a real example, but it should have your name on it, and it should have a judge's signature. I think that's the biggest thing. If you're unsure about it, take a picture of the document that they're presenting to you, hopefully under your door, and send it to an attorney, or send it to someone who can hopefully send it to an attorney. Oh, good. I thought there was a real example. Great. So on the left is the warrant signed by a judge, and on the right is an example of an immigration warrant that is not a judicial warrant. It's not signed by a judge. Judicial warrant is just fancy words for signed by a judge. So on the left, I think something that's really helpful is that it says magistrate judge. Usually judges have their title when they sign, so it should say judge or honorable or something like that. And on the right, it looks super legit, and it is a warrant for arrest of whatever they're using, the term they're using, but there's no judge signature. It says immigration officer, it says immigrant, whatever, title of authorized immigration officer, but that's not a judge, that's an immigration officer. So that's the example I was saying of them having a warrant that's signed by their supervisor, basically.
I would just say, for those of you who are U.S. citizens in the room and you know someone that, is scared or might need help, you could be the backup person, right? If they come into contact with ICE or anyone else, you could offer to be the person that they can call, right? That if they need someone to speak up for them or help them find an attorney, this is where you come in terms of being able to support someone in that situation.
Yeah, I think top 3 is like, don't open the door unless you see this magical document. You have the right to remain silent regardless of whether the document is there or not. And yes, those are, I think, 2 important things. Okay. I guess this has to do with the new law in Massachusetts, is it 2 years ago, that allows anyone of any status to have a driver's license. But obviously there are certain rules about having a driver's license regardless. And be careful about if you're not a citizen. I mean, in general, I guess, but these are rules for having a driver's license. This is up here because people of any status can have a driver's license, and any contact with the police or not following any legal rule as a non-citizen could put someone at risk of deportation. So, okay, good. So this is, these are the rules about what happens if ICE stops you while you're driving. The KYR card they're referring to here is the little red card I was talking about. As you can see, cars are a little confusing when it comes, this is all constitutional protections. The reason you don't have to open your door is because of the Constitution, and this is also because of the Constitution, but cars are kind of this confusing, anyway, this is not interesting, middle space. Anyway, so I think the important things to know here is you do not consent to search, you can say that. You have to say, the driver has to say their name and address, and never provide false documents. Obviously, never lie to any federal agent ever. Lying to a federal agent is a crime. And immigration checkpoints and at ports of entry normally refer to within that 100-mile border zone, or if you're entering or exiting the country in a car. There is a worry that Trump will start applying the 100-mile border zone to the coastal areas, because technically our coast is a border. And so previously, these immigration checkpoints really only showed up on the northern border with Canada and the southern border with Mexico, within 100 miles of those borders. But I guess this is, that big yellow box is up here because it's possible that maybe this administration will start putting immigration checkpoints within 100 miles of the coastal areas, which would certainly include Boston. Okay, yes?
I'll just say, as summer comes along and people travel to up north to New Hampshire, Maine, and different areas like that, that is within 100 miles of the border. And so you can get checked within 100 miles, immigration officers can check you for documents. So just keep that in mind if you know people who may not have documents. Maybe it's not a great idea to go up into, northern New Hampshire, Maine, areas like that over the summer.
Yeah, you can, the ACLU has a map. 2 out of 3 Americans apparently live within 100 miles of the border if you count the coasts. So it's a lot of us. But yes, the infrastructure is really set up along the northern and the southern border with the checkpoints and stuff. One time I went hiking in the Adirondacks and went through an immigration checkpoint. Okay. This is now about, we did house, we did car, and now we're going to talk about on the street or in public, what happens if ICE stops you, or the police. If you're in public, you have the right to remain silent and say you want to speak to an attorney. So that's the exact same thing as if you're in your house. A key thing if you're on the street is to ask, if you want, to ask, are you free to leave? Am I free to leave? am I under arrest? Am I being detained? Those questions are kind of a crucial right that you have if it's the police or immigration enforcement, because the police aren't supposed to stop, like detain you without a certain amount of suspicion of a crime. So that question, they may say, yes, you're free to leave, we're not detaining you. So it's a good question to ask. Yeah, that's the reasonable suspicion. Police can search you if they have reasonable suspicion. I think the second to last bullet is important under this administration. Previously, I think people with immigration documents, like visa holders, like student visa holders, or people who have work visas, may not have just carried those around all the time, or green card holders. But now it's kind of a good idea to do that. Oh, look at that, never provide false documents again. Yes?
I will just say about the false documents or false, sometimes they ask you for a lot of dates, like when did you enter? When was the last time you entered? And you might have, entered 5 different times. It's much better to say you're not sure than to give a date that's wrong, because that date will come back and, later on, it'll come back in a hearing and they'll say that you lied, right? So, and now you're dealing with fraud. So it's better if you're not sure about something in the moment to say you're not sure, I can go back and check. But right now, I can't seem to remember.
Next slide, please. Okay. Good. There are ways for people, non-citizens, to prepare for immigration enforcement, with status, without status, etc., and for their loved ones to prepare with them. There are emergency kind of forms someone can fill out for themselves that says this is my A number, which is the immigration number that everyone has who's registered with immigration, or this is my emergency contact. So it's just if we live in a hurricane area, it's good to have your hurricane bag. It's a good idea to prepare for worst case scenario. If you want to see that worksheet that I'm talking about in particular, you can come up after and I can send it to you. But in any regard, I think if you are a non-citizen, making sure that your loved ones in your house know where immigration documents are. If you have an immigration attorney, that they know what the phone number is for the immigration attorney, kind of basic things like that. And even if not in your house, just if you have a loved one or a friend who's a non-citizen, just asking them these questions, if they're willing to talk about it, would be good. Okay. Moving on. Okay, so this is if someone is arrested by immigration. The rights are the same. You have the right to remain silent. You have the right to call a lawyer or a family member. Usually the ICE's internal rule is within 24 hours, at least it was. Or call a lawyer. You can contact your consulate. I think a really important thing is if someone is detained, not to sign anything that says if they don't want to be deported or want to take something called voluntary departure, which is a different way of going back to someone's home country, not to sign anything that says that, and be super careful about it. And if they're confused, then to say, I don't want to sign this right now, I want to speak to an attorney. Once someone signs their deportation, they cannot take it back. There's really no way to do that, unless I think there would maybe a huge language barrier or something might, but usually no. There is something called an online detainee locator. If you know the non-citizen's A number, that's this number I'm referring to, every person who has status who's not a citizen in this country has a 9-digit number called an A number, and it's like their identity number with immigration. It's kind of like a social security number, but for immigration. And you can plug that in with their country, and their location, which detention center they're in, should pop up. Sometimes it's very delayed, sometimes it's very delayed, but it exists. And so that's another reason to have your loved one's A number. Okay. A lot of people can request immigration bond if they're in immigration detention, just like someone could request criminal bond. Some people are not permitted to ask for bond, usually based on violent crimes, if they've committed a violent crime. But yeah, many people can ask for bond. Like the two main things someone needs to show to get bond is that they are not a flight risk. That means they're going to show up to all their immigration appointments if they are released, and that they're not a danger to the community. And they can ask for this before an immigration judge. Usually their first immigration court hearing while they're detained, they can ask for bond. So if someone's detained and they want to ask for bond, it's good to find an immigration attorney if possible. They can take on their case and do their bond argument for them and submit evidence to support their bond. Okay, good. Keep going. Okay, so I will be very honest, I am not an expert on parental rights, but I will do my best here. So now we're going to talk about family preparedness, and if you are a parent who's a non-citizen and have children who maybe are citizens or have mixed immigration status. So you have the right to make arrangements for the child's care. You have the right to make decisions about your children regardless of immigration status. Yeah, I think you have parental rights even if you don't have status, is the bottom line. Next one, please. Thank you. So there's a family preparedness packet that I can share with you if you want, if you come up after, that talks about how families can prepare for immigration enforcement for families of mixed statuses or non-citizens. And yeah, I think good. Like the hurricane bag I was referring to, this is kind of like a hurricane bag, but for the entire family. And talks more specifically about children. So like who will care for your children in your absence? Like how will children get their educational needs met, medical needs, etc. So thinking ahead to make sure that your family is cared for if you are detained or deported. Here are some things that you could do ahead of time. You could update school contacts. You could register your child's birth with your foreign consulate so that if they want to move to your home country, they can do that. You can apply for passports for your child so that they have mobility outside of the U.S. You can write a travel letter so that they can travel with a trusted adult. These are some things you could do to be prepared. Good. These are different options for what happens if you are not present for your child, if you've been detained or deported. So the first one is the informal option, kind of what we've been talking about, like you could just have people who are ready to take care of your kid. There's also guardianship, which is on the other side, that you have someone has parental guardianship over your kid, but you have to go through courts to do that. And then there are the two middle ones, the caregiver authorization affidavit and the temporary agent authorization, that allows, it's kind of like in the middle of it, allows an adult to make decisions about your child in your absence.
Yeah, I think part of what all of this shows is when someone gets detained, or their whole lives get put on hold, and there's a lot of moving pieces. I mean, especially if you have children involved, now it's a second person's life. That is all the planning around that. And so, again, I think having a U.S. citizen friend is a very helpful thing to have during this time, because one attorney is not going to be able to address all of this. Like a guardianship, immigration attorneys are generally not equipped to deal with family court and family law. And so really having someone who is able to navigate some of that would be very helpful. So again, for those of you who are U.S. citizens out there and want to support, really connecting the dots is very important, right? There's going to be family guardianship or care plans that need to be put in place. And then in terms of immigration, there will also be, who do I need to contact for a bond hearing versus a court hearing versus applying for an application. So for those of you who are U.S. citizens, I think you could be very helpful in being that outside contact for someone.
Great. So here's the second bullet, talks about the A number. I think it's important to have, like a folder or a binder with all of the person's immigration documents, and it's in the part of the house that their roommates or their loved ones know about. Because an immigration attorney, the first thing they're going to ask is like to see these documents or to know the A number. They're going to need specific legal information that someone, if you're just like a friend or something, you may not know all the proceedings and the applications this person has done in the past about their immigration status. So just keeping that all together in one place and people knowing, loved ones knowing where that is really helpful and important, and something a U.S. citizen could do, be like, where's this, can I help you make a folder or binder, and where is it, and I want to know about it. To be your emergency contact. Okay. Now we're going to switch gears a little and talk about public charge, which was something done under Trump 1. And it was mostly, in my opinion, humble opinion, a fear tactic that made non-citizens very fearful of asking for or applying for different types of government benefits. But despite that, immigrant parents can always apply for U.S. citizen children to have welfare benefits or like food stamps, etc. Right now, there are no immigration consequences for applying for benefits other than cash assistance for income maintenance and long-term nursing home care. And in Massachusetts, state benefit agencies and healthcare providers do not report immigrants to ICE. I think the next slide says, could the rule change? No, it doesn't. Okay. But at some point, it will say that. But okay, so for right now, many immigrants are not subject to public charge. Public charge was a rule under Trump 1 that was saying that immigrants who have asked for or applied for benefits from the government are not going to be able to adjust to become green card holders.
Yeah, there are certain categories. Yep.
Yeah. Basically, it was like making it hard for immigrants to gain more permanent status here if they had asked for government benefits. But many people are not subject to public charge, so like all of these things on the right are people don't like DACA renewals, for example, if you've heard of that. But someone applying for a green card or a visa to enter the U.S., it does apply for those applications. Okay. we're still not at the question. Only 2 types of benefits are considered under the current rule, so that means only people applying to be green card holders and only people applying to enter the U.S. with a visa, if they have asked for cash assistance for income maintenance or institutionalization for long-term care at government expense. Those are the 2 benefits that could make it impossible for them to receive the green card or the visa to enter the U.S. But these are very specific categories, and so that's why I said in the beginning, I think it was mostly a fear tactic to make everyone who's a non-citizen think that any government benefit, and applying for any government benefit would put their immigration status at risk. But it's actually extremely particular. I have a friend who's a social worker in New York who works with immigrants, and like all day long she says to them, public charge will not apply to you. If you are thinking of applying for government benefits and you're worried about it, you can try to ask a legal person or maybe a social worker who's very legally informed, who can tell you if you would fall into one of these categories. But I think for me the takeaway is that it applies to very specific situations. Okay. Yep, okay, so here are all the things that do not count. Like my friend, she's normally helping people get on SNAP, and so it doesn't apply to those people. And that's why she can just say this, this doesn't count. This is about SNAP. It's not about those 2 other things that would make you at risk for the public charge rule. Okay. And there it is, could the rule change? So yes, of course, the rule could change. But yeah, no changes would take effect immediately, and immigrant rights advocates would challenge the new rule. Oh, good. Keep going. Yay. So I think there kind of has always been a lack of legal resources for immigrants in this country. Not always. For a long time, there's been a lack of legal resources for immigrants, and right now there's so much fear and stress, and people have so many questions that I think, unfortunately, immigration attorneys and legal advocates are like even more hard to get a hold of than normal. It's not like a public defender where like everyone is guaranteed a public defender under the Constitution. People in immigration proceedings are not guaranteed an immigration lawyer. They can, and many have to, go through immigration proceedings by themselves. And so because of that, sometimes people fall into the wrong hands, such as like notarios or like notary publics who are acting like they can represent someone in immigration proceedings, but they are not a lawyer, and they should not be doing that and cannot provide legal advice. And of course, an attorney is an attorney, a lawyer. There is another category of legal advocate in immigration that is, they are like legally correct and very helpful, and they're called accredited representatives, and they work solely at nonprofits, and they provide specifically immigration legal information. And I've worked with many of them, and they often know more than attorneys because they are like really in the immigration world and very knowledgeable about what's happening on the ground. So if you are trying to get help for yourself or someone and they say, I'm a DOJ accredited representative, I'm not an attorney, that's okay. They should, they're allowed to like file forms in court and do all of those things. They are well resourced to be helping you. So if you've been a victim of immigration fraud, you can contact the Attorney General's office here in Massachusetts or the Board of Bar Overseers There is a lot of immigration fraud, I would say, unfortunately, of having to do with language. I've seen when someone doesn't speak English and then someone explains things to them in their native language, but kind of goes in, I don't know what I'm saying. But I think, unfortunately, when people don't speak English, they may be at more risk for immigration fraud because they're not able to kind of double check the information they're receiving. And so if you know someone who doesn't speak English and they're trying to get legal help, I would be a little bit more careful in those situations. Okay. So here are some directories for legal resources. I will say, I think if someone needs help, immigration legal help, and they are not actively in a legal crisis, hard to say what that means right now, but, and they kind of just have questions about things, I will be very honest, I think there's an extremely low chance that someone could answer those kind of basic questions, which is why kind of we're here. The idea is to give basic legal information to people. So because there's such, fortunately, an absence of immigration attorneys and accredited representatives who are just able to pick up the phone and answer some questions for you. It's a little bit like trying to call a doctor, but like worse, I think, in my opinion. Yeah. So that's just to keep in mind. If someone needs an immigration attorney or they think they might, like, and they can pay for one, like, start right now, start today. Start calling and just, like, brace yourself for, like, trying to deal with, like, an insurance problem or something. You'll just be, like, calling a bunch of places and leaving a bunch of voicemails and writing a lot of emails, and that's just, like, unfortunately how it went before Trump too, and I'm sure it's even worse right now. And I think, Jill, you've done a wonderful job of like bringing up how I think U.S. citizens can help non-citizens. I think that that's a great thing citizens can help with is like, okay, you feel like you need an immigration attorney, can I help you call or can I help you write emails? Or like, oh, I know someone who might know someone, like let me help you find a legal resource because it's really exhausting and very difficult, unfortunately, to find legal resources.
Yeah, I'll just add to that. I think that was true even 8 years ago, but under Trump 1, I think there was a huge kind of push for funding, and the number of immigration attorneys increased. Like, it was cool to be an immigration attorney like 8 years ago. That is not the case now. I think there's a lot of fear. Federal funding has come down, right? So it's knocked a bunch of immigration attorneys out of work. So the general numbers are way lower than before. So that's not good news. But all that to say, part of the reason why the difference mainly between an immigration attorney and, say, a notario is that besides the training and the law school and all of that, immigration attorneys sign on to what we call a G28, which is a form that kind of legally binds the attorney to the case. And accredited reps do too. And so they follow this case along until completion or until the attorney stops working and withdraws. And what happens is that all notices get sent to this attorney, right? And cases go on for a long time, and this is part of the reason why it's really hard to find an attorney, because once you sign on as an attorney, you're there for like 3, 5, 10 years on a case. And you're like hooked on it, right? Legally, as an attorney, you are responsible for this case. You get all the mailings. And so that's part of the reason is that immigration moves very slowly, and it requires a long time and a long commitment. The good news is then attorneys are on, and they are responsible, and they will follow through on cases. I will say there are different types of immigration attorneys depending on ability to pay, right? So nonprofit attorneys, very hard to get a hold of because generally they charge much less. They are funded by other sources, so they are able to charge much less. There are low bono attorneys, which attorneys that run their own practices, but charge a little less, mostly out of personal conviction that they want to help, but they also need to make a living, right? So we call those pro bono, low bono attorneys, right? So they do charge. But you know, they're charging, you're gonna be looking at like, depending on the case, right, several thousand or up. But those are attorneys that may be available outside of kind of traditional nonprofit attorneys. Then there you have your bigger firms, and depending on your case, you know, there might be availability, but they charge a lot more. So there is a whole range of immigration attorneys. I would say some of the smaller firm, low bono attorneys, they are in high demand right now, but they are available as well in addition to some of these nonprofit attorneys.
That's a great point. All the scary things about like no one picking up the phone is about nonprofit attorneys, like free attorneys. People, if you can pay, I'm sure that some people will get back to you much quicker. And I would say just with usually nonprofit attorneys are like very well versed in what they're doing, but just like with for-profit attorneys, that's when you might run into more of the fraud sometimes, because obviously it's like for pay. So if someone's doing fraud, obviously they want to receive money. So just being careful, like getting a recommendation for an immigration attorney if you're going to pay for one is always a good idea. And also taking back what I said about no one answering your basic questions, if you have the money to pay for it, many immigration attorneys do legal consults. You can pay for a legal consult. It will probably be expensive. I don't know how much money, but if you have like 4 specific questions about your specific case, and you just really need those things exactly answered, and they're not going to be answered in like a Know Your Rights presentation or like in a document, you can pay for a consult. Okay, I think, yeah, you can get more resources there. Thank you, everyone. I know it was a long presentation, and we are excited to hear your questions.